So good afternoon, everyone. We have Dr. Malpani with us, Dr. Anirrudha Malpani. He's a renowned medical practitioner with over 4 decades of experience.
I look younger than that. Yeah, give me a break. Come on, Pratik. Huh? I'm older than I look and I'm wiser than I look. Remember that. So don't get misled by my looks. Huh?
Perfect. And we're here for the second part. We're going to talk to him about generative AI. And so we really want to have this conversation. A lot has been going on in the space right now. We really wanted to tap into your brain and your thought process as somebody who's at the cutting edge of investments and also healthcare.
And someone who's also a very cynical old man, because someone who's been through the dot-com boom and the dot-com bust and who's seen a lot of these hypes and fashions and bubbles come and go. Yeah. So I wasn't old enough to be alive during the tulip mania, but honestly, none of this is new. You know, we see this every years, and every few years someone says, fine, I've solved all problems. This is the magic sauce. All the previous guys were idiots. And, this is now going to transform the world. This is classical techno-solutionism or techno-geekism or whatever else. Hey, you know what? This is now the answer to everything. And obviously it's a bandwagon. Everyone gets on it. And I think people don't understand how much herd mentality there is within the investment space. Yeah. So much of it is driven by FOMO that it's not even funny. And then you kind of think, these guys are so rich, so they must be so smart. They've invested in unicorns like WeWork and Byju's. Sorry, I deliberately chose those examples. But, so obviously they must be smart, but no one tells you about the 99% of startups which they've invested in, which went completely belly up. And no one even tells you what their actual returns are. And the reality is, the returns of the top quartile of VCs are still perhaps better than the public listed markets. But the result of the majority of VCs are actually much worse. So there is opportunity cost for LPs, everything is locked up. But also you need to remember that people don't necessarily invest money for rational reasons. People do it for emotional reasons often. Oh, I'm at the, like you said, cutting edge. Dr. Malpani, तूने कोई generative AI startup में पैसा नहीं डाला है, तू तो गधा है, तुझको तो कुछ मालूम नहीं है. अरे ठीक है यार, अपने को तो कुछ समझता नहीं है. So that's fine. So I think we need to differentiate between technology and business. Of course, it's a cool technology. Of course, I use it all the time. Of course, I'm, really happy and I think it's going to make a world of a difference.
Yeah.
Does that mean that I'm smart enough to be able to identify which startups are going to make money as a result of this technology? I think those are two completely different questions. So please don't confuse them. I think the big problem with generative AI, and I'm going to keep on talking until you interrupt me. So if that's okay with you, the problem is what is called a low floor and a high ceiling. Low floor means koi bhi kar sakta hai, tu bhi shuru kar sakta hai. It just costs you a few dollars. So sab log abhi, a few years ago, everyone was a big data expert, ML expert, AI expert, everything else. Today, everyone is a prompt engineering expert or a generative expert and stuff like that. We've seen so much of this stuff. So again, I apologize. I mean, sometimes maybe we're excessively skeptical and cynical, but I think it's helpful. And I think that is our standard approach towards anyone who pitches to us. We deliberately play devil's advocate. And we immediately find out there are two kinds of people. People you can immediately make out kuch samajhte nahi hai. They've read the latest Gartner report, which boss maine bhi padha hai. Or they've read a Forbes article and they've copied and pasted which someone else has done, which is fine. Or this is a guy who understands. And we are looking for people who have the courage of their convictions and who are willing to take a contrarian approach. It's not easy to find a combination. Of course, they need to be right for us to make money. And I also understand that lots of them, the future is uncertain and unpredictable. No one knows what's going to happen. And that's fine. I'm not too fussed about the outcome. But unless I'm convinced about these two things, so I just take everything everyone says with a very large pinch of salt.
But I have a quick question here. I want to take a couple of steps back and want to understand, when was the first time you came across generative AI? What was that aha moment for you like?
I'm on social media as much as you guys are. So the moment ChatGPT, version 3.0 is going to change the world. So that was pretty much it. Having said all this, obviously neural networks, recurrent neural networks, convolutional neural networks, generative adversarial networks, learning all this stuff, and especially for doctors, decision-making, fuzzy logic, AI, all this is, we've seen a lot of this come, we've seen a lot of it go. The trouble is with most AI, It's still basic if then, and you just label it AI, and everyone thinks how smart you are. Now, there's nothing wrong with if then. And really, all I care about is the end result. Is it saving me time? Is it helping me to make better decisions? And I don't really care what happens inside the black box. But I hate it when people use buzzwords in order to extract money. That bothers me. Maybe I'm not the brightest bulb in town, but I'm not an idiot either. So, and then when people start doing that, it's kind of your, red flags. Say, "Arey yaar, too much of this." And I think this is trends we've seen just way too many times. And we've seen it across many fields. And it's like the standard Gartner hyper cycle. And even if you look back historically, what happened to beacons, what happened to IoT, it's not like the IoT is going to go anywhere. It's always going to be important, but it's not fashionable anymore. So a lot of the companies, when it was hot, were invested in, what have their returns be? Most of them have died. And I'm sure, and in a way, that's not bad. Let me also tell you, Pratik. And there is historical evidence to show. Let me give you a good example. Let's look at cars. We remember Ford. Oh, he revolutionized assembly line manufacturing and made cars affordable. What you also forget is there were 100 car manufacturers competing with Ford at the same time. You don't know the names of any of these guys because they all died. And this is the nature of business cycles and capitalism, that you deliberately build an excess of hype, enthusiasm, entrepreneurial spirit, capital. And then you know that this is the nature of the cycle, that some of it is going to go bust, but at the end of it, there will be enough which will remain. So as far as society is concerned, you're still making progress. It'll be more like a series of S-shaped curves. Who will make money? Who will lose money? None of that stuff anyone knows. And no VC is smarter than anyone else. If they were really that smart, then why would they spray and pray? And why would they use a portfolio approach? They would say, I know this guy is going to be bright, but the reality is no one knows. And that's the definition of a complex adaptive system. So, if some VC came up with a startup AI which could identify which generative AIs were going to make money, I'd put money there. But I wouldn't put money there because I know that it wouldn't work. And I think this is the other thing which people don't understand. There's problems with overfitting. There's problems with whatever you do will work for the data in the past.
Yeah.
And the future is going to rhyme, sure, but it's not going to be a copy. There are always going to be changes. And there is so much literature on what is called reflexivity. If you read about George Soros, is that the moment one person does start something, everyone else starts doing the same thing, as a result of which the equilibrium is changed completely. So you can no longer continue doing the same thing.
That we've been seeing a lot happen typically in this space, speaking from a point of view of building companies or from a standpoint of seeing all the investment action. Do you see this is sort of becoming a cohesive bubble of sorts? Something what, say, a Web3 was like a couple of years ago?
So again, I think you're using the word bubble pejoratively. You're saying, bubbles are bad because they burst. And people will lose money during a bubble. But my point is that bubbles are good for society as a whole. Bubbles are harmful for the investors who put the money which they lose. Bubbles are harmful for the entrepreneurs who spend 5 years or 10 years of their life and end up getting nothing. And that's the natural history. But remember one thing, entrepreneurialism is the one thing which differentiates capitalism from any other system. We all know that the only way to do anything is bottom up. Free markets are the best way we've devised to be able to get ready for the future. The only way to prepare for the future is to invent it. And nothing else works well. So yes, you're right. There is a cost. I consider that collateral damage. And I think you need some of that in order to be able to progress further. And I don't think anyone's going to be able to come up with something. And that's why it's important to have realistic expectations. So I always tell people, the money you put in a startup should be money you're willing to lose without losing any sleep over. Mm-hmm. And if you're not mature enough to do that, you're going to spend sleepless nights and you're going to give that poor entrepreneur sleepless nights.
Yeah.
And, I think, and that's why I'm so critical about the startup press and the unicorns. And, that's not the way businesses are built. I don't know why we get so fascinated by getting rich quickly and all the outliers and all the exceptions and stuff like that. All overnight success stories take 10 years. No one tells you anything about those 10 years. And that bothers me. And the reason it bothers me is because a lot of the next generation then kind of starts thinking, "Arey yaar, main to startup karane wala hu. I don't like my boss. I'm going to leave my job. Or itne sare log entrepreneurs hai. And the first thing they do when they want to do a startup is approach an investor, which is actually the last thing you should be doing. And then when I speak up, everyone thinks I'm an idiot. So I've stopped now.
I was holding back this question for the later point, but we've sort of touched upon that nerve. What is really wrong right now in the ecosystem and how it's being shaped up? The narratives, the examples that are being said. What are some...
Boss, we only have 30 minutes, no? Sorry,
Yes.
just kidding. No. But yeah, so I think biggest problem is this, is that we've effectively imported and copied and pasted a Silicon Valley model. Silicon Valley models work very well in Silicon Valley for two reasons. The cost of capital is cheap because don't forget, this is the world's reserve currency and they print it so they can have lots of it. Plus, it's a magnet for attracting the best brains across the world. This is well known. It's called the Matthew effect, where the rich get richer. And I think that's fine. And if I were in Silicon Valley, I'd do exactly what Silicon Valley does. But we are not Silicon Valley. And trying to copy Silicon Valley is the stupidest thing to do. We need to play to our strengths. A copy and paste model is doomed to fail. Part of the problem is we're so enamored by the West, thanks to our colonial slavery system. We're so enamored by billions of dollars. We're so enamored by what all these people do. And then you have all these cross-border, you know what, I made these millions in San Francisco and therefore I'm going to make these same millions in Bangalore, or I'm going to make these same millions in Mumbai, but it doesn't work. It's a completely different ecosystem. And I think the seed is not enough. The soil needs to be right. And I'm not even sure why we're so excited about creating a Bangalore Silicon Valley. We need to be proud about creating what works for us. So to give you an example, I'm much prouder of Amul as an example of a great company as compared to, let's say, TCS or Infosys. It's a homegrown Indian company. So if you look at the long-term impact of what they've done, I think that's remarkable because all the profits and revenues which they generate remain with the people who are generating them. Now that makes just so much sense. I mean, I understand this is not necessarily market capitalism and a lot of what happens gets skewed by the people who have the money. And I think that's part of the problem. And therefore the rich get richer and they, then whether it's your educational system or who your heroes are, and your heroes are Mark Zuckerberg, which is great. But I don't think Mark Zuckerberg is the right hero for Indian entrepreneurs. That's my limited point. And I'm so happy that now we're seeing a counter narrative. So I have a great friend whom I respect, whose name is Rajesh Jain. And he's written this great book, From Startups to Proficons. And he's, basically, let me tell you, when I talk, everyone says this guy's an idiot. A, he's a doctor, so what does he understand about business? And where are the unicorns which he's backed up? So what right does he have to speak anyway? तो उसको बोलने दो, rant मारता रहता है Twitter के ऊपर, कौन सुनने वाला है? Which is fine, whereas all these other guys have billions of dollars to invest and they have all these great success stories and they have all these MBAs from IIMs and IITs working for them, whereas अपने पास तो कुछ नहीं है. I get all that. But the point is that ultimately now you're starting to see a pushback. You're starting to see that these are homegrown stories which are not based on leverage, which are not based on raising money till there's no tomorrow, which are not investor dependent. These are entrepreneur driven, where it's the entrepreneur who puts the user first and keeps all the money for himself because interests are completely aligned. I think entrepreneurs don't realize that investors' interests aren't always aligned with theirs. It's very, very difficult to get patient capital because the nature of VC is impatient capital. It's designed to be impatient. Yeah. It's designed to be impatient because people are looking for quick returns. Because, let's step back a little bit. Most VC money all over the world comes from pension funds, which means they do what is called asset allocation. So most of their money they will put in safety, things like treasuries, bonds. Some of it, because they need to squeeze returns and juice them up, they will put in public markets. Some of it, and they're forced to do it. 2%, 3% they will put within the startup space. Now for them, it's such a small part of their overall, तो उनको तो कुछ फर्क पड़ता नहीं है. But for the entire startup ecosystem, it's a huge amount of money. And I think sometimes that's what the problem is, that therefore the metrics which are measured are very, very different because your horizon is, okay, fine, what am I showing? Because don't forget, GPs, these are the people who run VCs, need to keep on raising funds every 3 to 4 years. So you need to show results. So VCs are selling all the time. And in order to sell, they need to create media hype. They need to create success stories. They need to create Shark Tank India. They need to create entertainment. And the one thing VCs are good at is entertainment. Trust me.
That's an exciting insider stake. Now, I was reading this thread a couple of days ago about patient capital, something that you touched upon. If you had to sort of draw up a VC landscape or horizon for India first startups, would you still do like a 10-year cycle, or the capital the return cycle needs to be longer? The investment process needs to be slightly different based on what we are seeing, like the current trends. How would you change it? How would you go 0 to 1 on this?
I think the only way to do it would be to back bootstrapped entrepreneurs, because they are the one. And therefore, I would say, so I think people forget, 0 to 1 is fine. That's where all the sexiness is. But the 1 to 10 is really where the money is to be made.
Yeah.
And therefore, my focus really is on the SMEs. They are the unsung heroes of our economy, and they don't get any of their dues, anything else, because they don't use sexy stuff. You know what? They will use ChatGPT. They will use AI. But they're not the early adopters, because they understand that early adopters burn their fingers and they do not have money to burn. They're conservative, they're traditional, they have a 10-year horizon. It's not just a 10-year horizon, it's a 10-year horizon of their own money, which means they think about transgenerational transfer of wealth. It's not other people's money. So this is money which they're going to conserve. They're what are called stewards of wealth. VCs are not stewards of wealth. And therefore, these people have that long-term plan. And I love that longevity, because by definition, the longer you are, the more anti-fragile these businesses are, because they've been there, done that. They've stood through all these ups and downs and crises, whereas all these other Baijus and stuff like that are so fragile. The moment one thing goes wrong, they all just come tumbling down. And if nothing else, I hope people will remember that that's what the lesson is, what they need to learn. And I think part of the problem is people confuse financial income and emotional income. They confuse what are called resume virtues with eulogy virtues. Let me explain. Emotional income is the happiness you get in the morning when you wake up. Emotional income is the happiness when you sleep at night saying, I helped someone. And that doctors have tons of emotional income. And that's why I enjoy being a doctor. Doctors have actually pretty poor financial income, let me tell you, considering the number of years we study and the number of hours we slog and the number of problems which we face. Honestly, I think we're worse than daily wage. We are daily wage earners, but honestly, we get paid very, very little considering the amount of risk we take on. Because if you work for a McDonald's burger, at the most you'd burn the burger and they'll kick you out. Anything happens to a patient, boss, God forbid, it doesn't matter if you spend 30 years of your life being the best possible doctor. If shit happens, no control of yours, you're the guy whom everyone's going to blame. You're at the sharp edge, you're at this thing, and sharp edges bleed. So anyway, therefore I said you need to be very clear. Are you living by an outer scorecard of financial income, status, stuff like that? Or are you living by an inner scorecard? And that's what I meant about resume virtues and eulogy virtues. Resume virtues are I went to IIT, I went to IIM, I got this, I came first in the IIS or whatever else. Eulogy virtues are what people will say about you after you're dead and gone, 5 years afterwards, 10 years afterwards. And that's what I mean about patience. And that's where patient capital, and there's a great book, it's called The Infinite Game. And I think everyone's just playing a short game. Everyone's thinking about 5 years, 2 years, 6 years, okay, fine. And honestly, I thought the same way. So I'm not pretending to be wiser than thou, please. But I think at some point you do step back. And I think that's the great thing about India, that so much of our philosophy is rooted in spirituality. And, why do we think about reincarnation? Because it tells us that don't just think about what's going to happen in this lifetime. There are consequences. A lot of people say, next generation, baad mein jaye na, mujhe kya farak pad raha hai? I can spoil this earth as much as I want. Red Indians don't think that way. Indians don't think that way. Because guess what? I'm going to be reincarnated. And therefore, I need to be sure that this world remains habitable. So I think we have a much more sensible, much more long-term philosophy. But unfortunately, thanks to our colonial educational system, we've lost sight of a lot of that wisdom, which has been so deeply embedded in our tradition.
Sorry to butt in here, but I have this one burning question. Are short-term cycles really, are they damaging the entire narrative? And I want to sort of highlight a particular case in point here. Typically, education as a space, edtech as an industry in itself. I come from an education background. I've spent 2 years as a teacher, multiple years as working with the government, fixing education inside out. And none of the things that are marketed outside is what is even remotely relevant to the children inside the classroom. I was a teacher in a low income school, and I know none of this matters at all. And we've been now talking to a lot of investors, and now education is a topic. EdTech is now something that people are not really interested in.
I'm spending a lot of my money on EdTech because in a way, I think this entire system is going to get cleaned up so dramatically is that people are not going to waste money on Messi and Shah Rukh Khan. People are not going to waste money on cricket jerseys. People are going to put their money where their students need the money. So I think we've reached a good point, very honestly. And, boss, education and healthcare are never going to go away. Everyone's always going to require healthcare. Everyone's always going to require food. Everyone's always going to require education. So I think this is a great opportunity. Think of it as a tipping point. The Chinese word for crisis is both opportunity and challenge. And I think that's great. People are finally waking up. People are realizing that everything we've done has been very short term and focused for all the wrong reasons. And how do we put our students first? And you know why I'm so optimistic, Pratik? Because to your point is that the voice of the students was never heard. I think that's going to change thanks to the internet. I think that's going to change thanks to social media. I think the voice of the students is going to be heard loud and clear. The voice of parents is going to be heard loud and clear. People are going to demand answerability. People are going to demand accountability. A lot of that is going to be open, and people are not going to put up with rubbish. And I think that was the great thing about COVID, because it's during those Zoom calls, teachers realized that, you could say any rubbish to a kid, but you couldn't get away with that rubbish on a Zoom call because guess what? The parent was listening. And the parent could make out, ये तो teacher गधा है, उसको तो कुछ मालूम नहीं है, वो रट रहा है, किताब पढ़ रहा है, मेरा बेचारा बेटा तो कुछ बोर हो रहा है, there's no chemistry, there's no magic, my kid is fed up, I am fed up, what a boring teacher. And, we left school so many years ago that all of us have very rosy memories. I was such a bright kid. I remember all my best friends. I conveniently delete all the bullies. I conveniently delete all the terrible teachers. I specifically remember all the good times. That's not the way life is for a poor kid in school today. But we've forgotten that because, memory plays games with us. Our brains always fool us all the time. No memory is ever accurate. And therefore, we're no longer empathetic. And, people are actually cruel. When a kid complains, they'll say, you have to learn to stand up to bullying. When a kid complains that the teacher is bad, how come you're the only one who says the teacher is bad? How come all the other kids are doing well? Or when the kid complains that I don't understand what the teacher is saying, so how come you're getting an F and everyone else is? So it's always the kid's fault. And I think when a kid fails, it's the school which has failed him. And I think right now people are getting away with all kinds of rubbish and all kinds of excuses, and that's just not going to fly over the next 5 years.
Will that reduce the speed of innovation in education? Do you feel that?
Wait. So, there's a difference between speed and velocity. Do you know what the difference is?
Direction.
Thank you. So you could run very, very fast over a cliff and jump off. So wow, congratulations, you ran fast. So, Byju's blew 10 billion or whatever else it is over. So that's I'm sure that's some sort of a record. Is that really what you want? I'd rather we moved in the right direction, even if we did slowly. And let me tell you one thing. The moment you take a bottom-up approach, by definition, your pace is going to be smaller. Yeah. Because you're going to run multiple experiments and no one, the standard VC thing is what is called the hippo syndrome, the highest paid person in the room. And it's only his opinion and everyone defers to whoever the boss is. So even though the analyst doesn't agree with the partner, he dare not open his mouth because his career is at risk. And obviously the partner knows everything. मेरे बाल तो सफेद है, मैंने 10 साल पहले ये यूनिकॉर्न आइडेंटिफाई किया था, तुम लोग तो कुछ समझते नहीं हो. Anyway, so the point is that therefore, you actually want experiments. You want what are called positive deviance. You want what are called success stories. You want A/B split tests. Yeah. The trouble with A/B split tests is it takes time to get data. Yeah. Whereas if I'm an investor and I have to sign $1 billion check, I can do it in 2 minutes because I love the way this guy looks. I love the way he's wearing a Mark Zuckerberg t-shirt. I love the way that he looks just like Steve Jobs. हाँ यार तू मेरे पैसे ले ले. And this is what people remark about, all these, whether it's Tiger Global or whether it's Masa and stuff like that. अपने को तो कुछ समझता नहीं. So at some point, we understand that this is a long-term thing. And, our trouble is all these things make headline news. And I'm very boring. Call it a dhanda business, call it what. And everyone has this criticism. Let me tell you, Dr. Malpani. I said, okay, theek hai, I can't change who I am. But you know what? I'm spending my hard-earned money, unlike VCs are spending other people's money. So I'm fine. And that gives me so much flexibility because I break up my money into various buckets. Some of my money I'm perfectly okay with impact. Honestly, as long as I get the impact, I'm not too fussed about the money because God has been kind. I can easily allocate whatever my assets are. And some I'm very, very sure. And so I'm not locked into an asset class because VCs by definition, because of their information memorandum, are locked in. They don't have any flexibility. The moment the VC says I'm raising money for Falana Dikana, he can't put his money somewhere else because his LP will sue him. I don't have that problem. I only need to answer to my wife. And my wife's been married too long to me now to be kicking me out of the house. Anyway, so I think so that's all fine, So therefore, and I think asset, I can say this guy is not actually startup investable, but मैं, what, usko 10 lakh ka grant de sakta hu.
So I have one question around this, right? So especially when there are founders working in sectors like healthcare, education, how do you balance between the public good versus actually making money, right? I mean, we're not saying that you want to open a non-profit, etc. But if you want to build an enterprise in those spaces, where do you draw the line? This is for profit and this is for public good, right? I mean, then
no, wait. I think people get confused by profit versus not for profit. I think the key word is sustainable. Now, you may say Byju's is a for-profit enterprise, but it's actually a loss-making enterprise. It's not sustainable. People get confused. So you say, oh, VCs invest in profit-making startups. Don't fool yourself. A not-profit can actually be much more sustainable, scalable, because the difference between a profit and a non-profit is whatever revenue you generate. In a profit-making conventional industry, you distribute those profits to the shareholders or the stakeholders. In a non-profit, you distribute that revenue or those profits to helping increase your impact, or you help to increase the amount of services you offer and the number of people you offer the services for. Everyone needs money. Boss, I'm a capitalist. I have absolutely no problem. I love money. And I love people who love money because I don't want people who want to depend on handouts. I don't want people who will say, Dr. Malpani, aaj tumne 10 lakh diya, to mujhko 20 lakh do. I want someone who will say, Dr. Malpani, aapne 10 lakh diya, wo 10 lakh ka maine 20 lakh diya, to abhi mujhe 20 lakh do, main 20 lakh ka 1 crore दूंगा. Because I know that when I'm dead and gone, that guy will continue growing. Let us see kya hoga. I can keep on experimenting. I can keep on trying things. I can be flexible. And it's only me. And the reason why I'm so excited is because our ticket sizes are so very different from ticket sizes, which let's say the Omidyar network or all these other guys do. Because again, they're designed for the US. Our ticket sizes are, and the way I look at it is, if you can't spend 10 lakhs well, you'll never be able to spend 1 crore well. So we're actually using what we call a 1-10-100 model. Give 1 lakh grants, don't think about them. क्या होगा, जाए cheat करेगा, पैसा लेके जाएगा, ठीक है. 80% जाएगा, जाने दो. But the 20% to do something, which otherwise they wouldn't have done, could be transformation. And the ones who do something, then you keep on doubling up and you keep on giving money. And that's a model I'm actually very happy with because you forget, kisko diya, kab diya, kaise diya. ठीक है, you wrote it off anyway when you gave it, so you don't lose any nights. But for the ones who do well, it's quite dramatic. And then, you've been part of their journey. You've helped to catalyze a change which would otherwise not have come about. And that's exciting. I'm old now. I can't do a lot of this stuff myself. So therefore, I'm quite happy being the catalyst. And honestly, I think it's the next generation. Our generation has made enough of a mess. It's the next generation which needs to step up.
So what do you look for in an entrepreneur or anybody who's trying to solve a problem? Like you did talk about the problem and what sort of impact they want to drive, but what about the person or what about their thought process do you look for?
That's very dangerous, let me tell you, because entrepreneurs are so charismatic and it's so easy to fall in love with an entrepreneur that the moment you leave the meeting, "Arey boss, ye to main usko paise dene wala hu." And therefore you need to be, so it's like the book Fast Thinking, Slow Thinking. Yeah. So the fast thinking piece is still important. You still need to fall in love with him. You need to use that emotional part of your brain and say, I love this guy. But then you need to let logic kick in. Isko धंधा चलाना आता है क्या? इसको सिर्फ spreadsheet gymnastics आते हैं. उसने कितने साल ये धंधा चलाया है? I have a soft corner for older entrepreneurs. I have a soft corner for failed entrepreneurs. I have a soft corner for people who have a lot of domain expertise. And I have a soft corner for people who answer my questions well. And I'll deliberately ask nasty questions, and some people don't like it, and that's fine. I don't need to care about whether people like it or not. But some people understand. There's a reason why I'm asking, and some people actually appreciate the devil's advocacy. Because, it's not a one-time check I'm signing. This is hopefully a long-term marriage. So we're looking for three things. One is integrity. If you don't have that integrity, nothing's going to work. And that's often a big problem. The second is curiosity. Is this guy willing to learn? More importantly, is he willing to teach me? Because for me, I don't measure financial ROI, I measure learning ROI. And I'll come back to that again. And the third is humility. Does he think he knows everything and therefore no one's going to be able to tell him anything? Or is he still willing to listen? Because obviously there's so much stuff he knows which I don't. But on the other hand, perhaps there's something I know which he doesn't. I've invested in failed startups. I know what the leading indicator of failure is. I can highlight, boss, your cash burn is getting out of hand, or you can't really be doing this. So I think it's interesting. And the first question everyone asks me is, "Tu baatein badi karta hai, teri success stories kahan hai?" I say I have zero success stories, and I'm not even ashamed about that. So I said I don't have to raise money from anyone. And therefore, I can use internal metrics and I can use an inner scorecard whenever I evaluate. So it doesn't necessarily need to make any sense to anyone. And I'll also tell you where this all fits in. In the past, I used to make money as a doctor. The money you make as a doctor, you will never invest in a startup. Let me tell you that. It's hard-earned money. It's by the sweat and tears and blood and sleepless nights. And I understand money is fungible and you shouldn't accounting buckets and stuff, but we all tend to do that. Now, most of my money comes from the listed space. The Indian markets have been extremely kind. I'm talking about listed markets. They've done extremely well. I'm a very patient investor. Apne ko kuch samajhta nahi hai. So I give my money to people whom I trust. These are basically two PMSs. I learned this from my dad and from Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, that you allow the money to compound, that you identify companies, very Warren Buffett style. Don't churn. If you know that you know you're right and you're seeing something which other people aren't seeing, so you need to be contrarian and right. And that's much easier to do in the listed space simply because there's so much data. So that's the money I generate. And now there's lots of it which is being generated. No thanks to me. But anyway, it's coming in. I need to spend it. So therefore, and there's this great book called Die Zero, which says why you should spend your money in your lifetime rather than allow your kids to burn it after you're dead and gone. So when you're generating all that money, what do you do with it? Now, I could put it back again in the listed space, but what joy do I get out of it? It's an additional zero bus. What am I going to do with all that? I can buy maybe 5 books more, but stuff like that. So therefore, the other thing which I can do with it is invest in startups. And I met someone very interesting who said the great thing about investing in both startups and listed space, and a lot of people think you're stupid. How can you do both? They're completely different fields. He said, for one thing, these are uncorrelated assets. So when the public markets are doing well, startups are doing badly. When the public markets are doing badly, startups are doing well. So either way, there's something to look forward to when you get up in the mornings. You don't always have to look at a sea of red. There are always some bright sparks and you can ignore all the rest.
2020 was a great example of this.
Boss, you're a young kid, boss. I've been doing this in 99. So there are many more these things I can refer to, and that's fine. So I think a big problem is we are very ahistorical. We don't learn from the past. We don't look at the base rate. And Bal Safed Hone say you pay a lot more attention to been there, done that, seen that. The other thing which he said was very interesting. He said, there are certain domains where it's very clear that the incumbents or the large guys are going to be the winners. And I do not invest in startups in those domains because they don't have the right to win. On the other hand, it's clear that there are some large companies in certain domains which are so broken and so dysfunctional that the startups have the right to win in that space. So what I love about the fact is what I call a holistic perspective. This entire startup versus listed space is a very artificial divide if you stop to think about it. Today, startups will become tomorrow's blue chip companies. You want to identify that. So how do you learn? Now, no blue chip company CEO is ever going to talk to me. But you know what? This blue chip company CEO was a startup founder 20 years ago, and the startup founder will talk to me. So there's so much to learn from all these journeys. So I think it's just been very, very exciting. And, I've been extremely happy and God has been kind. And like I said, it's worked for me. Now, I'm not saying it'll necessarily work for anyone else. I'm just describing what's happened. Am I extrapolating to other people? Not necessarily. But, the one thing is I tell the truth. I don't need to BS. I don't need to lie. I don't need to be politically correct. So whatever I say is authentic.
I actually wanted to start this interaction by understanding what's your journey been so far. Like, why have you even started investing? But I think this sort of sums up that answer.
To your point, a lot of it is historical. as a doctor, I was very proud of being a doctor. And very honestly, I was financially illiterate, which means we did very well in practice. But when we had to file our income tax returns, we would give them to the CA and the CA would file them. And apne ko to kuch samajhta nahi tha. So he would ask, is this a short-term asset? Is this a long-term asset? Should I capitalize this? Said, you boss, do what you like. I don't even understand. Then what's interesting is my daughter, she started working for a company in England called Big Society Capital. This was a fund of funds for social impact. And she was doing all this financial stuff and I didn't understand any of it. And at some point, you want to keep your parents happy, but you also need to make sure that you don't become irrelevant to your kids' lives. And it shouldn't be, daddy, you're an idiot. All you understand is eggs and sperms and embryos, and you don't understand P&Ls, and you don't understand EBITDAs, and you don't understand, boss, okay, maybe I'm an idiot, but I can learn. And therefore is happy to learn. And the good thing is, the learning is fun. And the best thing is I don't actually have to do any of the stuff myself. I have a team. So I understand the theoretical construct, but I don't have to implement it. I'm terrible at pulling the trigger. And honestly, I have better things to do in my life. And that's why I pay these people, So we have a Malpani Ventures team who does all the startup due diligence. All I need to do is find people who have the same philosophy as I share. And it's the same thing for the PMS. Everyone, it's very, very hard to find trusted professionals. Trust me. When everyone is in sell mode, they'll all say the right things. And then, of course, realities. And I burn my fingers often enough. And that's something. So I think the one thing you learn over time is how to detect BS. And I pretty much, I don't have, I want to know BS policy. Boss, BS is bullshit.
Any pointers?
BS is bullshit. Like I said before. So don't get carried away. Don't think that I'm so smart that I can look at Pratik in the eye and say, yeah, ye to acha banda hai. Or ye Tanmay kuch ulta-sulta karne wala hai. Don't kid yourself. Come on, give me a break. None of us knows any of this stuff. And the only way you can judge is behavior. And that is why the best companies will always have a probation period. Because, no matter what happens, there's always a honeymoon phase. But it's only after the honeymoon phase that you realize what people actually are. And that's hard. And that works both ways. Because don't forget, when you're recruiting someone, the company is on its best behavior. And you give them laptops and you wine them and dine them and all that stuff. But then you only realize how toxic the company culture is after you join. And it's exactly the same thing the other way around also. So I don't think there are any shortcuts. I don't think I have any insights. The one thing I have is I'm very forgiving of mistakes. So I call myself an imperfectionist. I have made so many mistakes, it's not even funny. As long as I don't repeat them, I'm okay. And I'm perfectly okay with other people. You know what, 80-20, TK, maybe I would have done it differently. You know what, but maybe you did it better than I would have done it. And that's all right. So as long as it's a recoverable error, and even if you make a mistake, as long as you don't try to hide it, and you tell me, and therefore we both learn, and therefore we don't repeat it, I'm perfectly okay with that. So that's one advantage of being older, that you made many more mistakes than someone who's 40 years old.
I'll change gears a bit and move towards generative AI. Where do you see, or what examples have you seen in your social media scrolling time, where AI or generative AI has been making some outsized impact? And what have some examples that have stood out for you?
So I think basically there are two things. One is the B2C space, which a lot of it is hype and bubble and froth. But I'm a consumer. Don't forget that all investors are consumers. So we use that, and that's exciting. It makes my writing easier. It helps me to think. It helps me to play with stuff. So all that stuff is good. And you understand how we've evolved over time. There was an AI winter. Why did that winter change? All that good stuff. So it's a historical perspective. Where were we before? Where were we? So all that stuff is fine. There is also a B2B space. And I think it's going to take some time before we see some of that. So let me tell you where I'm coming from. I think whether it was AI or ML or anything else, there are basically four things. One is descriptive, which means it just describes stuff. You analyze all the data and you say, this happened because of this. You have correlations, logistic regressions, or whatever else. So that's just basic applied statistics. So, that's a descriptive stuff. The next stuff is what is called diagnostic, where you find patterns, where you say, this is the reason this happened. This is perhaps you're looking for patterns. And when it's big data analysis, it's much easier to find patterns which human beings would otherwise have missed otherwise. The money is to be made in what is called predictive. Anyone who can predict the future, whether you're using intelligence, whether you're using intuition, whether you're using creativity, whether you're using your leadership skills, whether you're using algorithms or generative AI or anything else, anyone who can predict the future is going to make money. So I think from the bare bones, which is, pretty simple, like I said, the descriptive, the diagnostic, because the diagnostic is still making some sense of it, the predictive, but the best is going to be the prognostic. And the predictive tells you, tum aisa karonge to aisa hoga. But you know what? I want to ask you, main kya karu ki aisa hoga? Because I want to tell you, this is the outcome I want to. So initially, right now, what does predictive mean? You'd say the process and it will describe the outcome. I'm very lazy. I want to tell you the outcome and you tell me what process I need to follow. That's prognostic. And I don't think we're there yet because right now it's like we're in the divergent phase. Everyone's exploring 50 different things, new AI applications all the time. This is cool, that's cool. I can dub, I can translate, I can do whatever. But at some point, unless you get that convergent thinking, where if someone puts it all together and starts adding value to workflow, someone who starts making my life easier. So let me give you some examples as a doctor. I think a lot of this generative AI is great for dictating notes, for example. Yeah. And one of the companies I've invested in is doing that extremely well. So right now in the past, doctors, when they need to make notes, 2 hours every day was spent transcribing what is called an electronic medical record, which means at the end of it, you sat and you dictated and you corrected it. And, doctors had become clerks and typists, very honestly, which is a complete waste of time. Now, thanks to generative AI, they actually just talk the note while the patient is sitting in front of them, and magic, that entire electronic medical record gets populated. So what would take them 2 hours now literally takes them, and it's actually a better note because it's learning from their phrases, their preferences. It knows what to populate, and it keeps up with the times. Doctors get old. But when things change, the AI will tell you, you know what, this is how you've done it. Would you perhaps want to consider this? It'll nudge you, it'll remind you. So of course, we're seeing some of that stuff. So I think that's fine. But that's, bread and butter. It's called robotic process automation. This is all very low-hanging fruit. I think the interesting thing is going to be at some point, right now it's still decision support systems, which I think are important. They will remind you, yeah, this guy has fever and you think he has malaria, but why don't you at least consider tuberculosis? Then at some point, it'll be more like a rank ordering system where it'll be an intelligent assistant who will tell you, so then effectively you'll say, what, and then it'll tap into the brains of a lot of experts who will, and I think honestly, it'll always be a combination of a human in the loop and the algorithm. And the algorithm will get better the more the humans there are, and the humans will get better the better the algorithms become.
What should the humans get better at? I mean, if the algorithm is sort of doing even the prognostic aspect, which typically like breaking problems down into steps and approaching was something humans were known to be or have. What should the humans now focus on?
Again, like I said, there are two things, and depends on whether you think this is utopian or whether you think this is dystopian. A lot of people felt the great thing about the industrial age and the industrial revolution is we would have so much spare time that we would be able to pursue all these literary pursuits and art and culture and listen to music because we would have spare time. I think in our culture, we take pride in how island in Hawaii, and he sees this fisherman fishing. And he's fishing, and then in 2 hours, he's caught enough fish, and then he goes home. So he says, 2 घंटा तो बाकी दिन क्या करने वाला है? Sir, I'll go sit with my family, I'll listen to music, we'll sit by the fireside, I'll play with my grandchildren, we'll cook a nice meal. I said, then what? Then I'll come back tomorrow and do it. So what an idiot you are. Why? He said, if instead of spending 2 hours, you spend 8 hours, you'd be able to collect 10 times the amount of fish. So then what would I do? So then you'd be able to hire 10 times as many people. So then what do I do? Then you would have 100 times as many fish. So you'd be able to sell it to. So then what? And you'd have all the spare time in the world. Then what do I do with the spare time? So then you'd be able to play with your grandchildren and sit by the fire. So that's what I'm doing anyway. So I think this is why we're a little bit screwed up in our heads, that we kind of forgotten what our priorities are. And I think, the luxury of spending time with friends, with loved ones, with family members, with not having to worry कि कल की रोटी कहाँ आने वाली, because the reality is we sacrifice so much in the pursuit of a salary. Papi pet ke karan, we do so many things which we don't even like about ourselves. We actually start hating some of the stuff we do. You can talk to any Byju's employees. Most of them hated themselves. It's not even just that they hated then cheat people, and you know you're cheating people. And it's very hard to live with yourself. And my hope is that, yes, of course, everything you're saying is right, and there will always be skills to monetize. But at some point, maybe some of these things will change. But who knows?
I mean, on that Hawaiian fisherman story, I had this one thought, like a lot of folks that we keep talking to are discussing this. It all started with students should learn, or students are going to tuition, let's bring them online. They'll probably study better. Then you do like, hey, online is better, let's do personalized learning, and then you hype it up. And then at that stage, you're like, no, I think tuition centers were much better. And now you're like a billion-dollar juggernaut, like a multi-billion-dollar juggernaut, and everybody's opening tuition classes.
It's going to take a very long time to change. And part of the problem is because we were a colony, we still have that slave mindset. We come from a position of poverty. We don't come from a position of abundance. We think life is competitive. My kid has to be better than the neighbor's kid. Sharma ji ka beta 2 tuition classes ke liye jata hai, mera beta 4 tuition classes ke liye jayega. And we don't understand that that's completely broken. And I think this is why you need to start with the end in mind. And we tend to forget that. And we tend to project and extrapolate our experiences to our kids. But our kids are going to live in a completely different world. And the trouble is we are saddling them with all our anxieties and our worries. And we're giving them all the ulcers which we have. And I think that's tragic. And I don't know whether you've read Tim Ferriss's The 4-Hour Week.
Not yet.
Okay, read it. So I think the 4-Hour Week is a great example of what a great lifestyle is. So he works for 4 hours. He leverages automation. He leverages assistance. He leverages everything else. And the rest of the time, he hangs out at the beach, having a good time. So there is a big difference between active income and passive income.
Yeah.
So the reason I love the listed space is it's all passive income. I do nothing at all. Then you may say, then why do you still remain a doctor? Because that is daily wage earners. Because the emotional satisfaction I get from my active income is still great. If at some point I don't get that satisfaction, I'll stop doing it. But I think you need to find that right blend. And God has been kind.
So since you touched upon automation, right? Automation in workplace, are there any specific pain points that you feel, right? And that will definitely get automated. And how does that then translate into, I think the way you said it, 4-hour work week, I think it will just be that people will continue to be more efficient. They'll find work to be done for 8 hours. And overall, they'll become more productive rather than being happy that I'll just work 4 hours. I think that's my thinking towards that.
So my point is, why do we watch the clock? If tomorrow the efficient guy can finish his work in 2 hours, then why do you make him sit in the office? Let him finish his work and let him run a side hustle, do something else. And it's actually good for employers when you encourage your best employees to do side hustles, because then they earn more money, they're satisfied, they learn for themselves. Whatever they learn, they will also apply, as long as there's no conflict of interest, as long as there's no hiding, as long as you're letting your boss know, this is what I'm doing. So I would be all for it. And so some of this, but again, this is all very clerical, Macaulay system, Babu mindset, come at 10 o'clock, leave at 8 o'clock or whatever else, 9 to 5. You're physically present and you're mentally absent. I don't understand any of this stuff. So, we talk about knowledge workers, but, this is all seat chair work. We're not really providing any credit. And you should accept the fact that people are going to be different. You should take advantage of that difference. And you have the ability to do it today. You have the ability to judge by outcomes. Most of TCS spends most of its life sitting on a bench, waiting for work to come in. God, what a waste. I mean, these are bright engineers. Whether it's TCS or Infosys, and no one considers the human cost of their sitting and having chai and gappe marang and talking and bitching about the office manager. And she went to USA and mujhe nahi bheja, aur mera kya hone wala hai, or I get underpaid, or, if I had been working in Google, I would have earned so much. And they're all the time looking for the next job and stuff. It's terrible. Again, people don't see any of that opportunity cost. Wow, I work for TCS. I get $1.5 lakh a month. Congratulations.
Sir, we're towards the end of the conversation. I have like a couple of very direct questions to ask you. Hybrid work versus in-office work. What would you prefer?
I am not a top-down person. I think everything works for whoever it works for. I think, and with everything in life, it's got to be a mix of both. It's okay if you come to office on Monday and Friday and you don't want to come the rest of the day as long as you're doing your work. So Monday and Friday, you come and meet your friends, hang out, be nice to the boss, make some girlfriends, go for lunch, whatever. I mean, come on, let's be honest. Man is a social animal. You don't go for work just to do work. You go for work to hang out. And that's the reason you go to school. You go to school to meet your friends. You don't go to school to listen to a stupid lecture from some stupid textbook from some boring teacher who's putting you to sleep. But we forget that. So that's what I meant about. And then you allow people to pick and choose. If tomorrow they'd rather spend their Tuesday watching a movie, let them watch a movie. They'll be more productive on Wednesday.
As an investor, what would Dr. Malpani's first preference be? B2B, B2C?
Anything which makes me money. What do I care? I'm very agnostic about where the money comes from. Money is fungible, boss. Koi bhi paisa kaise bhi banayega. So to your point, that when I said I'm flexible, I'm okay with revenue-based financing. I'm okay with loans. I'm okay with equity. I just look at my IRR. So the way I look at it is if the IRR, the listed, that's the internal rate of return, the listed markets is going to give me is, let's say 20%, whatever else it is. This is reasonable and I've had it over the last 10 years. Now, if I want to give a startup, I need a huge sweetener because the risk of that money going to zero is so large that I may end up getting nothing. So if I can find an entrepreneur who gives me, says, you know what, I'll give you a 50% IRR. This is what I want. And then people go, 50% IRR is rapacious, you're greedy, you're this. I said, to mat lo na, mere se paise tumko force kaun kar raha hai? I also have other opportunities. You also have other opportunities. Find someone else. But that's the metric I would use. And if you can come up, and the reality is there are lots of businesses which are generating that 50% IRR who can actually do a lot with that money. So I'm very, very happy. So I honestly don't care too much.
Future of education as a startup vertical in India. Your views?
So I'm happy to put my money where my mouth is. And I don't really care whether it's startup or whether it's an NGO. I think the reality is there will be always multiple players. So the government has an important role to play. I think parents have the most important. So one of the things which I very deeply believe about is homeschooling. And it doesn't matter whether you live in a slum, because even if you don't have your own PC, a group of parents can get together and create an affordable after school hours community coaching class, what are called nano schools, micro schools, and the reason why I love this model is it's very bottom up. It's localized to that particular community. So it'll learn in that particular vernacular language. It will be stuff which that particular community needs to know. It's answerable to those parents. It'll be a safe space because the parents are there. They don't have to commute long distances. It's not a greedy space. It's not out to make money to exploit the kids. It'll make money to continue running itself. So I think there's lots of alignment of interests. And I think two magic things happen. Because you're putting a group of kids together, there's a lot of peer-to-peer learning. And I think kids learn from other kids. They don't learn from teachers. So that's, I think then, plus you can enable them with technology. Because the technology has become so affordable that it doesn't matter whether you're in San Francisco or whether you're in Dharavi. You still have access to online resources.
There's this one question that a lot of people in the social impact space keep debating about: depth versus scale. Is it a choice, or
you know who asks these questions? The guys who write the $1 billion checks, because they have to worry: did you affect 1 million kids or did you affect 10 million kids? I don't really care. And the trouble with all these million is they all become vanity metrics. Yeah, you know what? I taught 10 million kids for 5 minutes each. What did you teach them? What was the impact? All these things are very volatile and quite pointless. So I'm a much bigger believer. Having said all this, I'm not a big believer in giving 5 people laptops because those are the right bright 5 people either. So again, I think it's a blend of everything else. And one thing I tell everyone, I have no answers. I have lots of questions. I'm happy to fund people who are happy to find the answers to those questions. I don't have any answers. And whatever answers I give you today, maybe if you talk to me 4 years from now, my answers will be different, and I reserve the right to change my mind.
Absolutely, that's how it should be. And my last question, which we are reserving for a lot of people: will AI take away jobs or end the world?
Of course not. I mean, people had the same worry when the steam engine came. I'm sure you heard about the Luddite movement. So that happens I think the world will be a different place. That I complete. I think the jobs will have to be reinvented. I think we will have to reinvent ourselves. But that's always been true. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And I think that's the difference. People who are willing to learn will never have a problem. The people who are willing to rest on their past laurels will not be able to keep up. No one ever said life was fair. Life is unfair. Just accept that and then learn to play to your strengths, to your kids' strengths, so that they can then continue shining and doing better for themselves rather than forcing them to do what the rest of the world wants them to do.
I think, sir, would you want to address whether AI will lead to end of the world? Do you think is that realistic at all?
So I think, like I said before, I think it's very helpful to actually look at science fiction. It's very helpful to look at newspapers published in the 1900s about what would happen when electricity came in, what would happen when the telegraph came in and stuff. And it's the same hype, this thing. Yeah, so honestly, I don't have this kind of long ability, and I don't believe anyone who believes they can predict the future either. I said, you're welcome to your, and if I say the world AI is going to cause the world to end, the first thing you should ask is, what gives you the right to say that? Honestly, I don't know. So
that's a good place to sort of end this discussion. Thank you very much, Dr. Malpani, for taking the time and speaking with us, sharing your insights and your thoughts. It's been an enriching conversation for us. I hope this is going to be an enriching conversation for people who watch this as well. Thank you very much for your time, sir.
Okay, thank you so much. And I just love your questions. I think it's much more fun when it's interactive rather than have us sit down and then listen to a long portion which I'm giving. So thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Bye-bye.